recording.
All right, because we're gonna have some,
You know, I'm sorry. It's early in the night. We got two shows going on,
and
and
we're hitting it like it's going out of
you
style.
guys are banging it like it's borrowed. I mean, and I'm sipping on a Miller High Life, the champagne of beers.
Champagne.
And I don't even like beer. So once I finish this fucker, I'm going to go ahead and tip it back.
Yeah, I've got first time for ancient age and many moons.
I had a little bit of it last night. I thought it tasted pretty good.
You had more than a little bit last night.
I just had that much.
How much?
That's a Tuesday.
It was a Wednesday.
No, I'm saying. Jeez.
Like I said,
Oh, don't you have a scarf incident you can go attend?
Oh yeah, let me put that on.
You're listening to Slightly Uncomfortable. Are you ready?
So
put it on, baby. Put it on.
I reckon we should start the show. Let me have a sip of the champagne. It's not bad.
Tastes exactly like I remember. It's got a little sweet to it.
Every bourbon you've ever drank, you say has some sweet to it. It's like you're drinking sugar water.
I'm more of a rye guy, man. I like bitter.
You could have brought rye.
I could have. I didn't though. But it's not bad.
Actually, that is a high rye mash bill of Buffalo Trace. They have the two rye
Yeah,
mashes.
I
That's
can
the
feel
high
it.
rye.
I can feel it.
Yeah, same stuff that makes Blanton's and Elmer
Yeah.
Tea is the same stuff that makes Ancient H. So, welcome to Slightly Uncomfortable. We have a full crew here this evening.
Woo!
We'd like to welcome the scarf-laden Alex back.
Laden.
He's laden. He's laden with a scarf.
African or European?
I don't know what we're talking about. So welcome back,
Swallow.
Alex. Nice to have you back. We also have Root
Hello.
in the co-pilot chair. And this is our second in our three-part series on religion. Root has already shared his path with us, and we really appreciate everybody that's downloaded that episode.
Yep.
It seems to have been received well. And this is going to be the same format. We're going to give the microphone over to Alex, and this will be the most airtime Alex has ever had
Yeah.
on our podcast
Yes.
combined.
Yeah.
The first 5 shows, he will have more tonight.
Yep.
Maybe.
Yeah,
He
well,
may just go, this is what I was. Your turn. We don't know.
yeah, we don't.
So
I used to be religious.
ain't no more.
Next.
So we're going to let Alex kind of introduce us to his religious walk, and then at the end of that, during that time, Root and I are going to turn off our microphones and attempt. Although we did pretty well with yours. I mean, Alex made some noise, and then I had to interject a few things.
Because you're James.
Overall, I thought I did well. But we're gonna remain silent while Alex is doing his introduction or monologue, whatever you want to call it, and then afterwards we're going to do a little Q&A, and hopefully we'll be able to ask questions that you all would be curious to as well. So without further ado, Alex.
All right, so my background, I've made a few references to things in a previous conversations about some of my experiences and that came from my religious upbringing. But I think specifically one of the things I mentioned was going door to door and talking to people and stuff like that. There's pretty much 2 religions that are known for doing that, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. I was the latter. I was raised Jehovah's Witness. I was actually a 4th generation Jehovah's Witness, which is actually kind of a little bit rare because it's a religion that really emphasizes proselytism. So it's grown over the years, starting in the late 1800s and over the majority of this last century. It actually grew pretty big and is mostly known. I think most people know it because of the people that show up on your door on a Saturday morning and have the Watchtower and Awake magazines. That's kind of that's what I think most people know about it. My upbringing in it was, like I say, being in a family that had been in it for a long time. It meant it was pretty much all around me. I think a lot of people who are brought into the church don't necessarily have that same experience of it being every bit of their life. But from my background, it really was. Every bit of my family was in the church, and pretty much all of my friends, associates, and everyone I spent any time with were in the church. As far as kind of what the way that I experienced it, it starts out, when you're young, just kind of you go to church, and incidentally, they don't call it church. They're very particular about that. They call it the Kingdom Hall, and you go to meetings. And when you go to the meetings, there's, at least when I was growing up, they've changed this a little bit since when I was a kid, but there were 3 meetings a week. So you were all the time at church, all through the week. If you were a consistent and regular member, which our family was, you were there 3 times a week. And then and that was just the going to church. That was not the then spending time going out preaching and stuff like that. Couple of the, you had your typical, well, it wasn't typical because I've seen what other typical churches are like, but you had your Sunday service, and then you had a Bible study program where one of the books that was published by the organization that's behind the Witnesses, you would study one of those books that was studying some part of the Bible. And then there was another meeting each week. For me, it was Thursday night. And it was to learn to go out and preach. And I have to say, like, for as I have become an adult and on, like, that's probably one of the most valuable things I actually got out of it, was the learning to speak publicly and speak, off the cuff to people and be okay with that. You learn that going door to door. Some people it makes them really nervous, but eventually, especially like through, like, say, it was a school for learning that skill of talking publicly and to people that you haven't met before and stuff like that. But what that meant was that it really just kind of like enveloped your life, and you pretty much all of your social connections were through that. And that was certainly the case for me. As far as like, I really wasn't encouraged, or was actually discouraged from having friends at school, or anything like that. No serious relationships outside of that. Not even to the point of, don't even hang out with the kids next door, kind of thing. As it's a church that kind of emphasizes the, I shouldn't say emphasizes. It does emphasize it, I guess. There are strong gender roles within the church. So women are not allowed to preach, at least, particularly not to the church, to the congregation. They do go out and do the door-to-door kind of thing, but they're not allowed to instruct at that level. So as a guy who was growing up in this church, I was, really encouraged to develop that part of it. So that was part of the public speaking stuff and things like that. And eventually I started on the path, which is, it has a lay clergy. So there's not really there's no preacher per se. It's people from the congregation are promoted to levels of, of leadership. So, there's not a form, nobody went to seminary, kind of thing. And in fact, going to college is actually actively discouraged as well. But that means, though, that, somebody like me who was growing up in it, raised in it, was actively encouraged to, to become more and more a leader within the church. And eventually there are a couple different levels within a given congregation. And I got at one of those, intermediate levels, by the time that I ultimately ended up leaving the church. But like I say, there's certainly some valuable stuff as far as being being able to speak publicly and stuff like that I took away from it. The beliefs of the church, and I'm sure we'll go into some of the details of some of these things, but I think a lot of people, the things that people either know about Witnesses is, they don't celebrate Christmas or holidays in general, and that they keep to themselves, and that they show up at your door and stuff like that. The reasons that they show up at the door, that's something we can certainly talk about, but there's quite a developed culture within the church, and because of that thing of not really associating with people outside the church very much, or keeping that to a minimum, it definitely has its own internal private culture. So probably in my mid-20s, I'd grown up in my whole life the church. It was my future. I had every intention, and was working my way pretty well to becoming a missionary. I got married in the church with the intent of that being, we got together because we both wanted to be missionaries in the church, and take the message to other people who hadn't heard it yet. Like I say, it's really emphasized the importance of proselytism. So that was my background. That was the situation I was coming from. But in my mid-20s, after having actually done a bit of a mission trip, which actually was a part of my leaving the church, I ended up having a crisis of faith that led to ultimately leaving the church, but paying a lot of attention to how I left, in particular to try and be considerate, caring, and not hurt people who I had, were my whole life and surroundings. That would be family, that would be friends, all that kind of stuff. You can have some success with that. You can't have entire success with that. So it was a balance, and it was a conscious choice to be balanced in that exit. But that's where I landed. There were a variety of reasons for leaving, and I think there were different reasons for within my family for it. But ultimately, I had to make that choice. It was an inevitable one. So anyway, I think that's kind of the basis, or the basic background, kind of where I'm coming from. I'll open it up to you guys.
Wow. That's a lot. And I think that if Root's anything like me, he's trying to wrap his head around all of it.
Yeah. All of these conversations, I didn't think about when we did my episode on this, what it would be like to sit on this side of this. And there's a whole lot going on over here, because, whenever you're talking about anything, whether it was a graceful departure like mine, or a traumatic departure like what you've discussed, it's still a very emotional journey, either way you go.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And for me, didn't take a whole lot of courage. For you, that's a ballsy move, brother. That's a ballsy move.
Well, and I think that's one of those things that I as I had gone through that experience, I felt like it was like my own and unique and everything like that. And the amazing thing is over time, talking to people and realizing how many people have had a similar kind of experience, not just in my church, not just in my the same. It wasn't the same situation, but it was the same experience for other people. So,
I think one of the questions that pop in my mind immediately. Number one, thank you. Thank you.
And as
And as Root knows, and now Alex does, and I'm sure I'm going to find out as well, delving into something that is very tender and very has a lot of buttons associated with it is not easy. And for the folks that are listening to this, please know that it's tough to sit in the firing line and defend something that you may or may not still believe is being something that has validity.
And, for us, we're three guys. We've had a lot of conversations down here. We've cut up and had a lot of fun. We've gotten to know each other pretty well. But this is a whole other level to talk about with just two guys that you know pretty well.
Well, here's the
and
thing.
we're putting this out live.
Guys don't talk about this shit. You know,
Not
when they're sitting on
normally.
the front porch somewhere.
Right.
So I appreciate both Root and Alex's candor and kind of exposing some tender parts.
I got some other tender
No,
parts.
you just leave everything you've got on. All right, fucker. We don't need to start the night off with that.
Here, put this scarf on.
Oh baby, oh baby.
Oh God,
Don't
his
you
man
tease
crush
me
continues.
over there.
So I'm going to start off with an obvious question. I think to me is, at no point during your background did you say that it was a cult. Do you think it's a cult? And
Yeah.
if so, what's your definition of a cult?
So I think so. That's an interesting question because it didn't come up. So my definition of a cult has largely to do with how they whether or not you get isolated on your way in and what
Check.
your experience is on your way out.
Check.
Yeah. So what do you think my answer is?
Right.
Check. And I've long since believed that most religions are a cult, depending upon what level that they are.
Oh yeah, I mean I have a friend.
Because everybody gets love bombed when they join the
Yeah.
church, and then when you leave, people don't talk to you at Kroger.
And the phone stops
And,
ringing.
and that's the I don't mean to minimize
Yeah.
the path that you had to take to leave, because that's a question I have coming up. But that's basically every church in the world, in the nation, anywhere, is they love bomb you, and they want to become part of your community,
Yeah.
until you don't do what they want you to do, and then you're dead to them.
Yeah.
In some way, form, shape, or other. They're going to pray for you, but they ain't going to talk to you at Kroger. Anyway,
Right.
I'm not going to get on my soapbox. Root, go ahead and ask your first question.
You mentioned early on, and this is kind of a light question, but it's always intrigued me when all of us, except maybe Alex, we've all had these knocks on the door, and
Did you
Surprise!
ever
So,
have
so,
a
so the
Jehovah's
funny thing is I have.
And you probably
Maybe
cussed the same way
a
we
whole
did.
lot more so after I left.
so they're always very polite and they're always very pleasant, wonderful
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
When I'm not there, my wife actually invites them in and gives them food and water, and they have a nice
Because
chat.
you don't let her see people.
Well, that's true.
We haven't seen her.
No, I'm not certain she's not captive.
Oh boy. This may be my last night on the show. So I don't know. But
He's been found out. That's what I'm hearing. The jig is up. He's got to move again.
I'm running out of states. But they do bring those two magazines.
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two? Is one instructional? Is one a comic book? What's because we don't read it. So,
That's the biggest waste of printing
isn't it?
in the history
Well,
of man.
they're reducing the printing quite a bit actually because reality is setting in, 'cause- and as is the internet.
Yes.
But so the two magazines, the Watchtower is the flagship magazine. That's the one that was started way back, before the turn of the century. That kind of is the instructional. It's got the handed down words from the leadership of the church that basically tells the congregation the direction they're supposed to go. It teaches the beliefs and changes the beliefs, which is an interesting aspect about the church. They and like I say, they don't use the word church. They use the word organization for the church as a whole, and then the local congregation meets at a kingdom hall. So the word church never enters the vocabulary. And it's actually one of those, like, those internal culture thing. If someone uses the word church, that they're not a Jehovah's Witness.
So is there a reason that they avoid that word? Is there
Because it is-
there's a conscious effort?
Yeah, but I
It
mean,
makes you part of the world if you use that word. Is that it?
yeah, it makes you part of the church infrastructure and Christendom, which is as a whole condemned. So as they do believe they are the one and true religion, that they are God's chosen people.
In that way, they have a lot of things in common
and-
with Baptists.
And
To all my
and-
Baptist friends out there, I mean you. Go ahead.
And so it is a differentiator, whether that's through vocabulary or culture. So yeah, they make a pretty big distinction between those. Like I say, you will never hear a Jehovah's Witness refer to their organization or location where they go or their congregation as a church, unless it's in the context of talking to someone who's not in the church,
Right.
who they know won't understand the distinction between those words.
So that's the Watchtower. What's the other one? Because
Sorry, the magazines.
That's the coloring book.
That's the Awake. So the Awake is far more about kind of like current topics, and it still always steers towards. It actually kind of steers towards the Watchtower,
Okay.
and
makes
has
sense.
current topics and things like that. I don't know exactly how it's changed recently, but I know they've kind of like reduced some of the printings and stuff like that. So I think the Awake is not as popularly printed as it used to be.
So my next question is going to start coming from the beginning. And mine is, as we wrote down these questions, it was kind of as your timeline, as you discussed, the beginning to when you left. Was there, you mentioned that everyone in your family was in the church. Was there anyone that left the church at any time before you did? Or has there been anyone that's left the church since you did in your family?
Yeah, there were the occasional, person in the family who didn't. Not in my like,
Immediate family?
at all. I'm the only one who's left. But interestingly, one of the like practices of Jehovah's Witnesses is called disfellowshipping, which is basically a formalized shunning. If someone does something that's against the church doctrine, they can be shunned. So they not only lose all privileges within the church, but are actually like treated as if they don't exist. If you see them in the store, you look the other way and walk off.
Baptist.
Not
And
quite.
but including family. So
That's-
parents do the same thing to their children, and brothers to sisters, and that kind of thing.
That's brutal.
So it's pretty intense, and it is with the intent, the idea of encouraging the person
Of course
to
it is.
come
Sure.
to the church, right?
Yeah,
But there's
that's
some
very encouraging.
yeah.
I love
it's-
you, darling. Here, take the bat upside the head.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry I'm never going to speak to you again.
You shun them out of love, yes.
But I hope you're encouraged by this.
So
Foot of
yes,
fellowship.
there were definitely family members who ended up getting disfellowshipped, and then there's this path to coming back, to where you can be welcomed back into the church, but you're still not trusted for a while.
You cheated on them. You're
Yeah.
going to have to earn your way back.
So there is that, yeah. So there were people who left, and honestly, that is a big part of the lesson, right? You see that lesson, you see how hard it is and how painful it is for that person who left or was disfellowshipped.
So they promote being devoted by fear.
That's certainly one of the tools.
Well, I'm not going to talk about other churches, but
Yeah.
there are other churches that do the exact same thing. They
Yeah.
just they candy coat it a little bit.
Li-
better.
li- Like I say, that as I left, I thought my situation was totally unique, and then come to find out there are plenty of other experiences like that in other ways, in other churches and stuff like that.
Right. Now, do you think that I'll get to my other questions later. I'm gonna go through my little timeline here because a bunch of things pop in my mind. So, did you all use like the King James Bible?
Oh no.
And if you did not use King James based Bible, whether it's NIV, whatever, what were your thoughts in reference to that, and what did you use instead of it?
Sure. So actually, I joke about that, but the beginnings of the church actually were I believe they actually did use the King James Bible as their first Bible, as they were
Kind of like what Mormons do. They have the Bible, then a secondary.
right. So then I want to say in the 1950s. I want to say I could be wrong on the dates there, but basically they made their own translation of the Bible. That was meant to be in more modern English. I think some would say also changed some key things that influenced
Happens in a whole lot of
that,
churches.
or at least that made doctrine within the church more palatable or more seeming like it came from the scripture. Whether that's true or not, the fact is, yes, they have their own Bible.
And what is it called?
The New World Translation. Now since I left, which was almost 20 years ago, they have actually, I believe, made a new revision of that translation. But the one that I grew up with was called the New World Translation.
So
and
that
it was,
is loosely an adaptation of the King James?
No.
Or that
No,
is an
they
independent?
they basically the claim was they went back to the original Greek and Hebrew and did a new translation.
Every single adaptation of any of
So they're
the
still
original
saying
King
the
James Version.
canonized Bible. They
It is
went
still
back
it is still the canonized Bible. There's no apocrypha or anything like
to
that.
Epigrapha.
And it is it's the classic 66 books of the Bible kind of thing.
Okay.
But it is their own translation.
So I'm going to do a follow up, and then I'll let Root ask his. What did they think of Jesus?
So that's an interesting doctrinal question.
Well, of course, I asked.
Yeah.
him.
Well,
No, Jesus.
I get intriguing.
so
something.
so they believe
This is before the bourbon.
So they believe that Jesus is the Son of God, his first creation, came to earth, was manifest as a human man on earth, and then was not crucified. He was killed on a stake, not a cross. They make
that's
a
important.
big
Why?
distinction of that. Distinction, I believe.
Just because they don't want to follow
Exactly.
the Protestant
And-
walk.
Whatever.
To be fair, the cross is a long-standing
Yeah.
symbol of other religions going back. I mean, the claim is that that's a pagan symbol that was just brought into Christianity. It's a distinction that's a big
So-
deal is made of that
He was
distinction.
brought in as a man, died.
Died for our sins and was resurrected. Goes back to heaven. Is put at God's right hand. And is preparing for the day when he's going to come back down and basically, wipe out all the wicked ones and establish
So he's like an Avenger.
a paradise earth, yes, and throw Satan into an abyss for 1,000 years.
Just random. For 1,000 years.
There are scriptures. There's a scripture for
I
every
know.
one of these,
Yeah,
but
I still think it's
but
random.
but
think that's in how
so
you
we're
say
getting
it.
into the deep the like
weeds.
longer
Yeah.
theology of
Right.
it, but it is distinguishing, and there are whole like bits of the culture that are based on those
So
distinguishing
the
bits
1,000
of.
years after he's in the abyss, what then happens?
He gets released again.
Oh, good behavior.
For one last chance to like corrupt people before
Corrupt him or to redeem himself.
We've kept you down there 1,000 years. Going back out and do what you were doing.
before he's destroyed forever, along with anybody he corrupted. And then from then on, everybody gets to live forever on a paradise earth, where plants grow with great food, and lions and lambs live side by side and don't eat each other.
Here on this earth. Here on this rock.
Here on this earth, yes.
This earth. Okay.
That's a lot. So, Root, go ahead. Let's see if your question is going to get that kind of. That was gold.
Yeah.
That's meat.
It is, and there's a lot to unpack there. We could go at this all night, but I'm not going to because I suspect Wikipedia and maybe, God help me, YouTube.
They've been going at it for a century, so.
So I can probably learn some more about that kind of theology on my own. One thing, though, you mentioned the resurrection. I don't know if that's what the organization that the witnesses, I don't even know what to call them.
You can say church,
Whatever.
cult.
That I don't know if that's what the witnesses call it, the when Christ comes back, there is a resurrection, the resurrection of the dead,
Or the
blah, blah, blah,
rapture.
blah, blah, the rapture, yeah.
So not a rapture, yes, a resurrection. So the
So it's going to be a very stinky place.
Those folks are really specific about terminology.
yeah.
Aren't we all? Though?
I
Well,
could
but
not make it.
those are actually two different theological
It is,
concepts.
it is,
Yeah,
it
right,
is.
So
It's- I got tongue.
resurrection is of bringing back the dead, and yes, absolutely. So when Christ comes down and basically brings Armageddon, that's the end of times, which is coming any day,
Any day.
any day.
That's
Perhaps
every
tonight. Perhaps tonight.
Repent and be,
yeah.
because it's fixing to happen.
Yeah.
It's been fixing to happen for the last 2,000 years. But get ready.
You
Yeah.
always got to be prepared.
You know?
Yeah. So when it comes, all the wicked die. All those who have died before have already paid for their sins with death. So
Like a penance or
that
purgatory.
death is the penalty for our sin.
the sting of
right?
death is sin.
There is no, and this is an interesting like very like metaphysical difference in witnesses is there is basically no afterlife. They don't believe in going to heaven per se
or purgatory, per se.
or purgatory. You die.
You just go to
Right.
sleep.
But you've now paid for your sins, because what we inherited from Adam was death as the penalty for our sins, right? So when you die, you die. So there is some peace in that, right? None of your family, that shitty uncle, did not go to hell, right?
Damn it.
But
another reason I
but you
don't
also
believe
don't have to worry that your mom who just died went to hell either. You know,
They're just waiting.
But
they're just dead. They
But
are
they're
gone.
waiting.
They're in God's memory. So.
that's a fundamental
So
difference.
it is a big fundamental
I've
difference.
seen a
so,
lot of fundamental
so,
differences.
Yeah,
so
but
when
that's
so
a
when
big one.
so when Christ comes back, he resurrects those who have died from God's memory, right? And now they have that next 1,000 years to become acclimated to this new paradise earth that's being established with only the ones who were loyal and and were Jehovah's Witnesses at Armageddon.
So to interrupt, because I'll forget if I don't.
And that's what he does.
Well, that's what my
Why
job
don't you
is
just
here.
ask your question?
So, well, you interrupted me. Interrupted. So, when you say that Jesus comes back and the wicked die, is that anybody that's not a witness? Are they considered wicked, or is it just good people?
If you died before Armageddon,
No, I'm talking about the people that are here on earth.
oh yeah, everybody else dies.
That's not a witness.
Yeah,
Now, where
and,
does
or was a witness but wasn't a good one.
But God makes that call,
But God makes that call.
or
yeah,
Jesus?
yeah.
which is another question I've got for you if you're
Go
done.
ahead. Go ahead. By all means, go.
No,
So-
thank you.
There was one other thing with what you're asking about. So that 1,000 years, Christ now reigns as the King of Earth during that 1,000 years before Satan gets re-released and potentially
What's
to
God's
take
role
away.
during that 1,000 years?
God is
He just kind of steps away.
he's the master. He is. That's actually a really interesting question. I don't know that there was ever an answer that was like presented as to what's his role during that 1,000 years, because 1,000 years is as a day.
Right.
So
Yeah. So but that kind of gets to that next question that I had, in I guess traditional Christianity, regardless, if it's Catholic, Protestant, whatever, there's the concept of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
And we all pray to Jesus, but we all also recognize that Jesus is God. So, but
Now, see, I'm a little different with that, because when I was even active in the church, I didn't pray to Jesus. I prayed to God.
you pray to God in Jesus' name.
Right. But I'm directing my prayer to God. So I don't necessarily pray to Jesus. I respect Jesus in my prayer.
right.
But I don't look to Jesus to fill whatever question or request or whatever I was doing through that prayer.
But the three are one at
Yeah,
the end
yeah,
of the
yeah,
day.
yeah, yeah.
But that's not the takeaway that I took.
That is
from
not
what you
that
were
is not
talking about,
witness theology.
What Alex
Correct.
was talking about.
So yeah, Jesus was the firstborn creation of God, named Jehovah. Jehovah is the God. Jesus was his firstborn creation. So he is his son. He is God's son. So no, they are not one. And so John 1:1. Well, we can totally talk about that, but and that was actually, interestingly, that was actually one of the little areas in the New World Translation that is a little slightly tweaked.
Oh, I'm going to have to get a copy now. I think James just tried to snort his bourbon.
I was trying to sniff the nose, and I poured it up my nose. By the way, not the best way to try a bourbon.
Probably not.
Just snorting it is not the best way. Please continue.
No.
So yeah, no, the Trinity is actually one of the big distinguishers in the church, and it was actually one of the very first distinguishers in the church. Before all the other kind of like doctrinal things got really established, Trinity was one of them, and as was the meaning of the sacrifice. But the Spirit, just to finish out the trifecta.
What role does the Spirit have?
Trifecta. I'll take place.
The Spirit comes in third, because
What's odd on Jesus
showed.
because the Spirit is God's active force. Incidentally, just for what it's worth, 20 years in, and this stuff still rolls off my tongue. I cannot believe it.
Well, it's because it's all you knew.
Yeah.
How old were you when you left?
I was probably 24.
So you've had more years in than you've had out.
Yeah.
Even though you've been out 20 years.
Now. Yeah.
A quarter century of your life was wrapped up in this.
Yeah.
And
It'll never leave you.
And it wasn't like what Root did with his faith,
Right.
where he
That was
he,
a decade.
he did this, and this, and then came into it, right? And it wasn't like what I did, where it was a part of my life, but it did not surround my whole identity.
Yeah.
There is something called brainwashing, and what we've heard is exactly that. You create an environment, all the support, all the guidance, everything is contained within that belief system.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as brainwashing. I take your point, but from what Alex said early on, this is 4 generations in. This is
Brainwashing.
But it's practically genetic memory at this point too.
Mm-hmm.
It's all the family knows, and everything outside of that realm is wrong.
Sure.
So
And they are crafted, they're skilled at the fact of making sure the kids that are coming up within the faith
are
know that.
embedded in it. Yeah.
And you practice arguments against it.
You know, that was
That was part of that theocratic school thing, right? I mean,
Right.
it had the value of learning public
So
speaking
it
stuff,
was,
but
it was a few years ago, not all that long ago, probably last year, that I had somebody that I was close to that was talking about becoming a Jehovah's Witness, and I immediately went to Alex and said, "What do I need to tell them
Right.
to keep them from doing this?" And I was fascinated by what Alex told me at the time, because in my past I had things that I could say to folks that were part of other religions that would try to steer them away from them, but they really didn't. I wasn't really well educated on what to do with cultists and things like that, because it was outside the norm for what I was doing. But at the end of it, what really surprised me was my original intent was to have this person meet with Alex. He's like, "Can't do that. I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and you're going to need to do it. But I can't be a part of it." And that is 20 years after walking out of that faith. Am I not right?
that's right.
And to see that's almost PTSD.
Well, and if
Because I mean, in being part of the military, you in the community that you're a part of now, you see what when you are
I've seen that
programmed
reaction.
a certain way, and your world changes. It stays with you from now on
Right.
in little segments that you don't at times even see coming.
Yeah.
Would that be accurate to yours?
Okay, so when you decided not to meet with this individual, why? What was the rationale there? Was it an emotional withdrawal, a defense mechanism, or what?
No, it was a pragmatic, basically a choice of. You really, honestly, I mean, 20 years out, I still have the potential of completely losing family and and loved ones over speaking freely, whether, just freely, openly, honestly. And I will never be anything but honest about it. But you have the real potential of losing any of that. More and more, I don't have a lot there that there is still family that I really would hate to lose. And even this conversation, I would hate to lose them because of this, but at the same time, there comes a point where you have to be just yourself too.
Right.
Man, again, I said this after your monologue. That's balls.
Well, and,
That is
I don't
balls,
think
brother.
that we can't, Root and I simply can't fathom what that looks like. We really, I can't.
No.
I can't fathom what it looks like to be in a situation where your whole support system, your family, your friends, your mentors are all going to just pretend you're not there anymore if you make that decision. So that leads me to my next questions. You said you had a crisis of faith.
Yeah.
What was that?
So it's an interesting one because I think there are a lot of distinguishing doctrine and stuff like that within the church, right? So I've talked to a lot of different people who have left, and each of them has had their own kind of thing that was the thing that
Straw that
really
broke the camel's back.
straw that broke the camel's back. For me, I'm a pretty like methodical and logical thinker kind of a person.
I would have never
that
guessed
is true.
that. I would have never guessed that.
Lord, he can
And-
have 21 steps, put his shoes on. I mean, that man,
I've got them written down.
Even the scarf that he's wearing is tucked in.
it is for a purpose.
I know. We don't know it.
Yeah.
Probably would never understand it, but there it is.
Don't want to.
No, it's true.
But
Evidently you do because you have a crush on him. Anyway,
there's
go ahead.
that.
So in my case, some people leave for pretty, whether you call it emotional or whatever reasons, they are ultimately like they have a sense that something's not right. They can't handle their brother gets kicked out of the church and they can't handle the thought and reality that that's what we're supposed to do. Right. And so it causes them to have that crisis of conscience or, crisis of faith. For me, it was the theology itself actually has some pretty hard establishment of why they are the one and only true religion. And it dates back to some of the predictions they made back when they were first being established. So there's a really important date to Jehovah's Witnesses, which is 1914. And there was a prediction to...
Bo, you just gave Root a Woody. I mean, when you start doing dates and history, damn, he perks up like
Oh,
a
and
moist snack cake.
knowing him, he knows exactly why 1914 is important.
I know
But
several reasons why it's probably important.
He
Yeah.
but-
probably has very different reasons for all of them too.
so basically,
Tuesday.
So basically, that when you have that whole thing of the saying that the end is coming, and it's any day. Inevitably, you have somebody who says, "And I know when."
Date setters.
So there was a date set in 1914 for that was going to be the end of times, essentially. And God was supposed to come down in his chariot, kill all the wicked, all that kind of stuff. It didn't happen, obviously.
I'm like, damn it, I missed something else.
But something really important did happen in 1914, which was the start of World War I.
World War I, the Great War.
And so
Did they just give a year, or did they give a specific month?
they
or-
gave a year, and it was based on a particular calculation.
Okay.
So 1914 is really seen as this really pivotal moment for the church because they predicted 1914, and then there was the war started, and the leader of the church kind of came down and says, it's here.
Yep.
That's it. I did it.
prophecy came true.
Yeah. So in my particular case, what happened was that there was part of the basis of that calculation turns out to be totally wrong.
Because it comes down to math.
Because it comes down to math. And guess what? Math works.
Math always works.
2 and 2 is always 4. I don't care
So-
what you do.
Math is very unforgiving.
So it came down to that, and there
So you did this calculation is like, this is bullshit.
Yeah, and it was one of those things that's kind of slowly over time they've kind of drifted away from how much they place importance on that and all that kind of stuff, and what happened was I had I had this like realization that there was something odd about the math, and then could not find, and they are the single source of truth for everything,
of course
right?
they are.
So they have this huge library of books
Sounds a lot like the Vatican.
on that you're supposed to reference for any kind of theological, biblical questions you have. I couldn't find an answer to this one anywhere. It was like totally dark. As
Means
to,
he was onto
and
something.
so I found it in like one book, and there was this like vague reference kind of thing. And so I had to go looking more. I was like, I've got to find the answer to this because surely it's not wrong.
Of course
It
not.
has to be true. So I've just miscalculated something. I need to find some answers to it. I went out, found more answers, and the answers I found were, no, this is totally not true. So now what else is not true?
Right.
So the moment you have that fissure, right,
Then
it
it's a
starts leading
cascade.
to like,
Yeah.
what else? So yeah, that was the basis of mine.
Okay.
I'm queued up. Queued up.
We may have to stunt him a little bit because he's sitting like 3 inches higher. in his
Oh
chair.
baby. He done talked about history.
History.
I'm all in it.
All right,
And then he
rein
mentioned
it
math.
in just a little bit.
I'm okay. I got this. But you did mention math. And the one thing that I've heard tell of about these heard talk of.
He is so excited.
Oh boy, I tell you.
Formulate sentences.
Yeah.
I've heard talk of. He turns into Ernest T. Bass at the mention of one fucking date. That's it. It's all tough.
Dude, 1914, that whole progressive era, it just fires me up every time. But that's not what I'm going to talk about.
Thank God.
Because you mentioned the math, and that threw a number in my head that I've heard in reference, and I have no idea what it's about. There's 100 and some odd thousand of these witnesses, folks.
Yeah, we're going to spend some time on this.
That,
'cause I
that
got
this
some questions,
entire
too.
world's supposed to be populated by. That's a lot of rock for a very small amount of people.
They have a calculation for that, but
It may not work,
I
but
have
you have one.
they don't know where it
and
is.
I don't remember the particulars of it, but
Okay.
Math.
Yeah.
but yeah, there's basically this idea that like there is actually enough land on all of Earth for all the people who have lived before us and would live, in this paradise Earth, and since the whole Earth, there's the idea that basically the whole Earth should be a paradise, right? There was Eden, and it was a paradise. Adam and Eve got kicked out of it, but if you made the whole Earth, all the way down to Antarctica, a paradise,
luck, I'd
that's
get
a lot.
fucking Nicholasville.
That's a lot of land, right?
I'm in Jasmine County.
That's
So-
Nick Vegas to you.
Damn it.
So anyway,
So
it's
what
more
is the
it's like
144?
all the rest of Earth is currently not paradise. It would be, and it would be livable.
Okay. What is that number? What is that 100,000?
All right, so the 144,000 I mentioned earlier, I kind of glossed over the idea of do witnesses go to heaven?
Right.
They don't, they believe when you die you're dead, that kind of thing. You might get resurrected in paradise. But there are 144,000 who go to heaven to rule as kings and queens over the paradise Earth. So I don't, there's not really any specifics about, like, oh, you're the king over District A, but
You get Nicholasville for me. James, you get Nicholasville. Really?
or what that means. I think the idea is generally that they are like the advisors and guidance for.
So the hierarchy
for-
is established
yeah.
with the 144.
But those 144,000 are basically the most faithful over the entirety of mankind.
And
So I think the common misconception in my mind is that's all that's going to make it.
right.
No,
So what you're saying is the 144,000 are the chosen ones
they're the
that will have more responsibility in this heaven on earth.
yes, except for they will have been raised to heaven. They are actually going to heaven, as opposed to all the people who live on earth. They go to heaven
They
to
get
be
like-
kings and queens,
they get
spiritual
Paradise A.
spirit, spirit creatures, and those who have already died, who are of those chosen ones, have already gone to heaven and are waiting for this Armageddon and 1,000-year reign.
So not at all to make light. I
Well, we do that sometimes.
I know, but in this instance, not at all to make light. But you said those who have gone before, who are part of the 144. Mm-hmm. So if
You're
24,000 have gone before, is that just 120,000 now?
That's all that would remain. But those, again, the vast majority of witnesses do not believe they're going to heaven.
Okay.
They
As
think
a,
they've already missed
so
the
so
boat.
as a,
Right.
well, no,
Well,
not
no,
that they
no.
haven't missed the boat, but the largely the 144,000 have already been selected. I
Well,
think
no,
the last
it's
number.
a
I think the last.
predetermination.
I think the last number I heard, and I don't. I mean, again, I've been
Is
out
there
for a
a
while and
ticker?
stuff like that. But so there is actually a number for who probably are going to heaven, in witnesses. So every year they celebrate the. They celebrate
The one fucking thing they celebrate.
the one thing they
is who
celebrate
they ain't gonna make it.
It's a digital counter that flips down.
is the memorial of Christ's death. So communion, is observed.
So that's
is,
their Easter.
No, it's nice and 14. It's specifically tied to the lunar calendar, like Passover is. So it's basically Passover, but it's it's observed once a year, and at that observation, if you are chosen, and only you know if you're chosen, you partake of the emblems.
Well, hold up. So you have a ceremony or a
Yeah.
celebration,
Uh-huh.
and only the individual knows if they're chosen.
Yep.
So there can be all levels of bullshit.
And interestingly, there isn't that much. I mean, granted, I'm
So it
sure there
sounds like-
is.
It sounds like that these, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the people within this belief have been beaten down to the point to where they don't think that they can excel past their level. Because it seems like to me that, as you said, almost everybody thinks they ain't going to make it to heaven. They're not going to be part of that 144,000. So they're just happy to be part of something.
Yeah, so they're happy to be part of the ones who are going to inherit Paradise Earth.
Yeah. So the fact that they make that's the
That
limit
is
of
that
their
is
aspirations.
that is the aspiration.
Because when
Yeah.
you said that, it only you know if you were chosen
Mm-hmm.
in the faiths that I have been a part of. If you had 300 people in that congregation, 300 people are walking right up there because, my God, I've been chosen.
Yeah. So interestingly,
So
so
the
the
humility,
so
I think,
so
there, and also the beaten downness of it is
there's some. I think you've got something there. Yes. The I don't know the numbers anymore. I don't keep track of exactly how many there are. But when I was around it was around 7 million witnesses.
since the conception of the faith.
No, currently.
Oh,
Yeah, that go to one of these observations, one of these, the memorial is what
Okay.
they call it, and they usually would also like really promote it, so there would be a lot of people who would come, extra, right?
So it's like Jehovah's Witness Woodstock.
It was kind of like that because it's their one thing a year, right?
Burning Man.
But at that observation, so you've got probably 10 to 12 million people coming to this, maybe 15.
And where is this held?
It's at the churches, at the Kingdom Halls.
So it's locally held.
Yeah, it's held locally. But they do the thing of they pass around the wine and the bread. That is the emblems. Christ's blood
Seems to be universal.
and bread, right?
We do
But
watches.
of that, when I was there, it was like 9,000 out of those millions of people would actually take.
And those were the ones who
And
felt
those
as
are the
though
ones they
were
felt that
chosen.
they were chosen.
I mean, I think it speaks to the environment that religion has, in that out of 7 million participants, 5,000 actually feel as though that they have exceeded the norm level. Is that fair?
Yeah, so it's
That's a
it's
very,
supposed
very
it's
small
supposed to
percentage.
so this is supposed to be one of the manifestations of the Holy Spirit, though.
Okay.
The Holy Spirit is what tells you that you are one of the chosen ones, and you wake up one day and you know it.
Okay, so
we were getting into some like deep theology here, but
right,
yeah,
but, okay, so that's weird. All right, that's kind of weird.
And we don't want to belabor this
No,
because
no,
I
no.
mean I think getting into the weeds of theological,
Right. Well,
what's the word? Theology.
That's kind of the
That's the bourbon.
That's kind of the point, and the bourbon, but that's kind of the point that I was leading into.
And we appreciate the detail
Yes, we do.
because it's still blown me away.
But it sounds like every religion out there, Christendom, Judaism, Muslims,
Or Judahi.
whatever. You know, the craft, all these things out there. There are rituals, and the Catholics call it Mass. The Christians call it the cantata, baptism, all these things. It sounds
Revival.
like
Oh,
it sounds like this memorial and the witnesses is part of that religious ritual.
That's one of the high rituals,
Right.
you know. Yeah. So,
Right. So-
I would say that, and between that and you know, that's the one that's kind of like a uniquely, they go about it their own way.
Right.
And then the going out and preaching is itself a ritual.
Right. That it's do the witnesses consider that mission work?
Yes.
or does everyone do that?
Everyone does it. If you are a witness,
If you're-
you know,
if you
cap-
have-
cap-
What you're
capital
supposed to do
W
by
witness,
definition.
you are supposed to
If
be
you
out
have
witnessing.
if you have any hope making that 144, you best get your ass out to the neighborhoods and knock on.
Oh
some
no,
doors.
no! You're not trying to get into the 144,000.
There's no goal there.
That's
That
just
is
doing
not
the
a
work.
goal. That
That's
is
just
never a
doing the
goal.
work.
It is if you want to make it into Paradise Earth, you better be. But
Because even some of the bad Jehovah's Witnesses don't make it.
yes,
Well, but it.
I ain't celebrated fucking Christmas in 25 years and I don't make it. I have a problem with that.
All right.
How many presents have I missed and still don't make it? I'm going to be the one going down to hell going, fucker! So I have one last question. And
And I have one more too. It's kind of light, but go ahead.
what steps did you have to take to leave? Because, I mean, this is a lot going on. Now, I don't necessarily want you to divulge your inner struggles with leaving because I
Sure.
think that's way too personal for what we're doing
Yes,
here.
I agree.
But what steps pragmatically did you have to do to leave?
yeah, sure. So leaving the church at any moment
It's
in
an organization, from what I recall.
leaving the organization, yes.
I pay attention.
Yeah, and it actually that is exactly how they would have said it, is leaving the organization.
You're welcome.
That sounds like La Cosa Nostra.
I don't know what that means.
So in order, there is no leaving really, and without formally leaving. And if you formally leave, you are going to get shunned. So formal leaving is any kind of declaration saying I'm not one of you and I'm leaving. But what I personally did was not ever make a formal declaration. I basically just, they call it drifting away, and I went inactive, which is basically a person who doesn't go out preaching. Now that said, I did that going from being essentially a deacon in other churches and they have a name for it, but it's basically someone who goes out and does the preaching work a certain amount per month, a lot.
Right.
And it's a formal position within the church. So I went from being those to dropping off of all of those intentionally, somewhat gradually. I did inform family, you know, that this is where I'm headed, kind of thing. Unless the church itself declares you as having done it, they don't feel like they're entirely obligated to say not associate with you.
Is part of it for them to keep their numbers up?
I don't think so. Personally, I think that it would be far more about keeping more people from leaving.
Yeah. Nobody talks about the refugee that climbs a wall.
So in that leaving, you know, mostly what I did was basically intentionally, and you know, most of it was don't make waves as I left.
Yeah.
Walk away quietly.
Very quietly, like don't say a word.
Yeah.
But that said, like I say, 20 years later, and I still could have them come after me if they chose to.
You know, and I hear with
Okay, but brother, if they come after you, you let me know.
you got a witch on your side. I know that much.
No. I am not a witch.
But you know them.
No, I don't. You
can call somebody.
No, I don't. I don't need no fucking witch to defend this brother.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's pathetic that the control that they try to apply to people, to humans.
Yeah, well, and it's
And
not.
I don't mean
I mean,
to speak
and I and
down
I,
to it.
and I certainly have lost plenty of friends and family in it.
I
right?
think the word pathetic on my part was an overstatement. I don't want to speak down to what other folks believe, but I have a problem with any organization or individual that bullies people to get their way, and that is absolutely just fucking bullying them,
Right.
threatening them and saying you do what I want you to do or else. That's exactly what that is.
And or else by their own human hand.
Yes, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
God. I cannot imagine. I just cannot imagine.
And I mean, mad respect. I know
Absolutely.
for me, and I can feel it from Root as
Absolutely.
well, that number one, doing what you did.
That's balls, brother.
And,
That is just balls.
and number two, sharing it with us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I could not have assumed any of this. I could not have, Wikipedia or YouTube would not have told me this walk.
No.
So I think the way that we end this is, where are you now?
So I think the interesting thing that happens when you walk away from something that's that ingrained and just deeply entrenched in you is that, like I say, with that first question, like, well, wait, Jerusalem wasn't destroyed the year they say it was? That leads to 1914, right?
Josephus may have had something to say about
Yeah.
that.
So it's like, okay, well, what else have I been taught that isn't true, or that at least I should think about a different way, right? So it opens everything up for question. And so where I'm at now, after you kind of open everything up for possibility of question, that leads back to, is religion even a thing? Like, is it a viable choice? Is God a thing? If God is, well, what about all these other gods all around the world, and the different belief systems? And I was raised here, and it just happened to be that I was raised in this family. It was 4 generations of this church, and I thought I knew all the truth. So what about these others that think they know all the truth, right? So it leads to being willing to be open-minded about all the different possibilities. And for me, that has led back to kind of a general, at this point, I don't have any religion. I don't have any theology. I would say as far as God goes, I'm an agnostic atheist. So I can't say there isn't. I don't, I can't know that, but the evidence doesn't point in that direction for me. And when it comes to like worldview and kind of what I think is important, I think that we are what it is, right? No one's going to step in and make things right for us. We have to do it. We have to buck up, do the work that's needed, and make things better ourselves. So in that regard, generally one label at least that's applied to that is humanist. So that's kind of my general direction. Is let's make it better ourselves, and let's not wait for anybody else to make it better. Let's not wait for the end of times, because
Let's not apply faith and hope shit works out.
We have the ability, and not only we have the ability, I think we actually are. There are plenty of people who are motivated to make that happen. So yeah, my general direction is to say I think the best of people. And despite all of that, the individuals in the church, they're good people. They are trying to do the best they can. They believe earnestly, and it's unfortunate that sometimes when you get people in a group, they start behaving in ways that are not.
Brother, none of us as stupid as all of us are, right?
Yeah, right.
I think one of the things that we're gonna see as a consistent thread is, whether it was the craft with Root, whether it was the witnesses with Alex, or whether it was the people that I was associated with, we respect those that are devout, whether we're in that or not, because being devout in any faith, in any walk, is not an easy life to lead. So the respect is there. We don't have to necessarily agree with the theology. We don't have to necessarily agree with all the things, but we do respect that. They're good people trying to do the best with what they know.
Yeah, and you can only, a person's experience is only as far as it. They can only take it as far as their experience is. I would actually limit that to a bit. For it still depends on how you treat others.
So it's golden rule stuff.
Yeah. And you can take a religion and turn it to where it treats others very poorly.
Absolutely.
Even if your lessons are supposed to be of love and kindness. So
because humans are assholes.
I don't like white people. I mentioned that. I don't like white people.
Yeah. And
That's a whole different podcast, but I don't like people that look like the three of us.
and I'm sorry for interjecting that because that was
I'm
wrong.
not sorry. I don't like white people.
Well, I don't
If
like
you're
people.
a white person listening to this, I probably don't like you.
see, I actually think so. So this is one where we differ
Right,
because
it is,
I
it
actually think the best of people. I think it generally is when we get together and like have a bad idea together.
Right, well, and that's what I said earlier.
that it's a problem individually, and I've been treated kindly by people of every type and religion, and
I would agree
and
with that.
Yeah, I would.
and non-religion.
Here's the thing.
So
If you look at the essence of any religion, it is love.
Should be.
It's how it's applied by the individual as to how it feels to the outsider.
Yeah, and how what they think love is.
Right. So, thank you. I mean, I think we can both say, wow.
I mentioned this a little bit earlier. It wasn't part of the broadcast, but I want to make it part of the show. I've known a lot of badass people in my time. I've known people who've been shot at. I know people who were awarded for being shot at and shot back and won that fight. Brother, this ranks right up there. This ranks right up there.
I appreciate it. I wouldn't claim anything to being shot at, but
Well,
but here's the
but you're being shot at by bullets that can hurt much longer than lead.
Residually.
Yeah,
Nobody gets
Well,
shot
thank you.
one time and it hurts 20 years later.
exactly.
Repeatedly.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, equally as bad.
Right. If not worse.
Yeah.
So, we never thought, I don't think that we really ever thought that on the conception of this podcast alone,
yeah,
that it would have this type of impact on us individually.
no, I certainly
Because
didn't.
I saw the struggle that Root went through to do his show. And if it didn't come across in the podcast, then that's on us. But there was a struggle to make himself vulnerable and it's almost like putting a turtle on its back.
Yeah,
There's no defenses at that point.
I'm not a turtle, James.
Well, you are built like one.
Okay, I
I
can't
ain't gonna
argue
lie to
that.
you. I worry about you in the summer. And then you've got Alex's walk where it is even more so. I really appreciate this forum
Yes,
and this option that we have to talk about things that maybe can help somebody else out somewhere, or if nothing else, appreciate other folks when they hear the craft, hear the witnesses. When somebody knocks on their fucking door, they don't treat them the same now because they know what they have went through, what they're going through, and what they are risking by choosing not to.
and so far as the people who go out there and knock on the doors and are doing what they think is right, not because and I don't know what's in each individual's heart there, but folks, don't be assholes to these poor folks coming up here doing what they're called to do, what they believe they're called to do. Maybe they are called to do it. I don't know, but say no, thank you. Wish them a good day.
Offer
Maybe
them
offer them some
something to
water.
drink.
Yeah. But don't be.
If they're
assholes to
Mormons,
these
don't
people.
offer them anything with caffeine. You don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's true. But just don't be assholes to people. I don't care if they're knocking on your door or not. I think we're gonna learn more about James in a later episode of this series.
Yeah, you are.
Y'all know where I am. We just learned where Alex is. All three of us, I believe we can agree that as humans on this rock, we need to love one another. and that's the highest call for a Christian is love each other.
And it should be the highest call for any
It
faith.
should be the call for everyone,
And they will
regardless
all
of faith.
claim it is, but in practice, few of them show it.
Exactly.
So, without belaboring this, again, Alex, thank you. I know it's been an awakening for me, and
Man, I'm sitting over here humbled.
and just so that folks know that we're going to do a 4th episode of this. Whereas I know since Root has listened to his podcast,
Yeah.
he has things he wish he should have said,
Right.
or things he could have said in a different way,
And things to clarify,
right,
etc.
And I'm sure after this is released and Alex has a chance to listen to this, he would like to probably have things that come up to say, I want to emphasize this, or maybe I misrepresented that, whatever the case. And I'm sure I'm going to do the same thing.
I'm pretty damn sure you're going to want to do
There's going to be some repentance come up from me. But we're going to do a 4th episode.
Yeah.
So if there is questions that you all have as listeners that we can direct toward Root or Alex, and even after mine, please utilize the forums that we've spoken about in our other episodes to
Facebook.
reach out to us and let us know what we can do to clarify anything.
And one more thing, not to shit on what we're talking about here, it's pretty heavy.
Oh, it seems like
But-
he's going to.
Rate us on iTunes, join us on Facebook. It's real easy. Just look up Slightly Uncomfortable and look for the logo, and off you go. Let us know what you want to hear about. If you got questions about this episode or my episode or James's or any episode, ask.
Or suggestions about what you'd like to hear us talk about.
Yep. And there's
Because we have a show coming up that is totally listener sponsored.
yes,
We did not think of this idea.
right.
This was not something that we came up in a think tank or anything. This was something a listener started with.
Yep.
And we've had other listeners mention, and now we're going to roll with it. So
Yeah.
we really appreciate that.
And it's going to be fun.
Oh, it's going to be awkward.
And it's going to be something that'll make you slightly. I'm
Is it gonna
already
be
slightly
uncomfortable?
Oh, I'm real uncomfortable.
I'll tell you what, we're going to see Root wiggle. I ain't gonna lie to you.